PennLive Wrestling Podcast is back, and it's the best time of year if you're a Penn State or if you're a college wrestling fan in general. Bob Flounders here with Jim Carlson, who literally, as we're recording this Wednesday lunchtime, literally just got back from the great state of Illinois, Evanston, Illinois, the site of the Big Ten Championships, which is, if Penn State fans don't know, it's Northwestern. Just outside Chicago, my favorite city. Jimmy, very eventful, as we expected, very eventful Big Ten championships for not only for the entire league, but also for Penn State. So many storylines. Penn State came out of there with 5 individual champions, won the team title with 181 points. A couple of wrestlers really stood out for Penn State. There were also some surprises, which we can get to with you. And there's also a very significant injury involving Josh Barr at 197. And we could talk about that and maybe what you see for him, if anything, because the national tournament is about 8 days away in Philly. Yeah, I believe it starts, March 20th in South Philadelphia. But how are you doing? How was your trip? And are you a nervous flyer in that order?
Oh, no. Oh, well, I'm between trips. As you said, I spent 5 days in Chicago, 2 for the Big Tens and 3 with my son. I must say Evanston is a beautiful town, very nice campus. And it's off to Philly, as you said, for 3 long but exciting days. But at the NCAAs, it's a tournament where you just never know what might happen, and something wild always does, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's, Cael Sanderson says that every match, every tournament is preparation for the Nationals. He stressed that last weekend in Evanston. And here we are. We'll find out if they are prepared enough to win their 4th straight title, NCAA title, and 12th in the past 14 tournaments.
Crazy.
So history says that, and this past season says, and last weekend conference tournament not only says but screams that they are indeed prepared. So it wouldn't be a national tournament, though, Bob, without questions, and a handful of those questions going in, I would say, include, can they break last year's scoring record? Their own. How many individual champs can they crown? Can they place all 10 guys? Something that's been done just once since 1928. Yeah. And the biggest question of all is, will they have 10 entrants? Will Josh Barr be at 97? He was helped off the mat after his match, or during his match with Minnesota's Isaiah Salazar with a left leg injury. Looked like a knee, Bob, because of the way he was hopping up and down, trying to sort of shake it off. But I've seen guys treat ankles that way too. And I won't even mention calf muscles, so we can speculate all we want.
Yeah.
But we basically won't know until next Thursday, I think, if the number 3 ranked 197 punter will take the mat. We'll see what Cael says on Monday.
Sure thing. And because I had a little bit of a brain glitch, Wells Fargo Center, I cannot believe I didn't get that out on my first try. In Philadelphia, it's the hub, South Philadelphia, between the Eagles, the Sixers, Phillies. That complex is gigantic. Wells Fargo Center is the site Thursday through Saturday. Just before I get to some questions for you, I would say this. So they had 5 champs. Carter Starocci was I think the most outstanding wrestler, and deservedly so, for what he's done not only in the Big Ten Championships, for how he's wrestled all season. I thought your story on PennLive, your spotlight piece on him and his motivation and how he looks at things and how determined he is, and how tough he is, when it gets to the critical points of the match, he's the guy that doesn't flinch, or at least he has not been the guy that flinches. And there's been some pretty talented guys this year that have taken runs at him. And ultimately, if you make one, it seems like, Jimmy, you make one mistake against this guy late in a match, he makes you pay 95% of the time. He was tested in the tournament. We could talk about him. You mentioned Barr. I just wanted to mention the other champions. Luke Lodal got his act together. Not that he had much to get together at 125. I think kind of I don't want to say a surprise winner, but I don't know that you or I had him winning on our bingo cards. Tyler Kasek. That guy has more head contact in matches, I think, than any wrestler, not just at Penn State, but in college history. The guy just looks like every match, Jimmy, it looks like he just, and I mean this in the best possible way, he looks like he just came out of like a head-on collision in a car. But he found a way to win. Mitchell Bessenbrink got slowed down. He won. Levi Haynes, I think maybe might be the more overlooked wrestler of the 5 champs, just because how he has gone about his business all season and just thoroughly dismantling people. He did it again. He did it again out in Evanston. But why don't we just start with Barr? And I think one thing maybe you can, since you've covered Penn State for a long time, you can kind of provide some perspective on this, because a lot of people might want to associate what Josh Barr is going through with what Carter Starocci went through last year. But just a cautionary point of it is Carter had more recovery time. Carter got hurt in the final regular season match and actually had a couple more weeks. We don't know what the injury is. That could be totally different injuries, but it's clearly a shorter recovery time. So when you just kind of piece all of that together, and based upon what you saw and based upon how hard-nosed and mentally tough these Penn State kids are, what is your best guess for maybe what Cael, the training staff, and Josh, I mean, obviously they're going to wait and see till the last minute, but how do you think they're looking at this? And how do you think maybe last year's situation with Carter not only differs, but maybe helps in this situation, them get a guy ready?
Well, it's interesting because at the very end of our access with Cael on Sunday, he said that they sent Barr back to the hotel. He said he walked out of the arena, and I'm thinking, well, I've got a sore knee, and I walked out of the arena as well. But that we'll leave that at there. But the worst case scenario would be a knee. Is it strong enough to be wrapped up like Starocci's was last year, from the top of his ankle up to his thigh? Next would be ankle, probably. That can be taped. Calf muscle, if it isn't torn, certainly can be taped. But there was a photographer on the mat who had told some people that he heard Barr say to the coaches that he heard it pop. We don't know what it is. We don't know what popped, but a knee can pop, an ankle can pop. I don't think a calf muscle can pop necessarily.
Calf muscle can pop. A hamstring, Jimmy, can also pop. So that's another one just to keep in mind.
It didn't look like a hammy, just the way. Okay. I don't think it's a hammy, but
I think a groin also can too. I don't want, like I said, you were there. There's a lot of things that could pop lower leg related. So I just am going to be. I just wonder how stacked the deck is, given the shorter recovery time. If they're going to try and make a go of it, because he's had a fabulous season, and he was wrestling so good going into the tournament. Tough weight, but your thoughts are: is your best guess, Jimmy, that they're just going to they're going to give him as much time as they can to recuperate. Absolutely. But at some point, there's probably going to be a point of no return where they got to figure out, if all the medical testing is done and it's a pain issue, they got to see how he feels on it, right? At some point.
Yeah, well, he's a gamer. We know that. Come Monday, I mean, he can withdraw up to Wednesday.
Okay.
Now, what does that mean for the rest of the field? It would be another wild card, or perhaps another Big Ten guy they could put in there. But that's a late notice. But the reason I say that is because in 2017, maybe, Nick Sirianno he literally broke his ankle in the Oklahoma State match, Penn State, Oklahoma State. But it wasn't a serious break. It could have been an avulsion fracture. I can't remember now. It was quite a while ago. But they had him ready, they thought, and he had gone home and over on the off weekend and had some doctors mess with it there, and they actually made it worse, and they had to pull Sirianno out the day before the event. And nobody was happy with that, and from Penn State to the NCAA itself. Yeah. So it was a little wild. But yeah, I think they will do everything humanly possible to get Barr in that lineup.
All of the weights are challenging, right? All of the weights, the higher you go, bring different tests. But that is such a physical weight, 197. His style is so physical, and the guys he needs to navigate in that tournament are just incredible specimens. I think maybe the higher you go up in weight, maybe it could be even a little bit tougher. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I just look at some of the horses in that tournament, and it could be really challenging.
And if you look, he lost to Cardenas, who he had beaten in the dual meet. I mean, it was very close. It was that overtime reversal, if you recall. But he lost to them in the semifinals? Quarters, I guess. Anyway, then against Salazar, is when he got hurt. So he would have had to have beaten Buchanan too, or Cardenas again
Oh,
in the consolation there. But yeah, it's a tough field. Tough field.
yeah. Jimmy, so before we're going to get to the highs and lows of the tournament, we're definitely gonna get to your thoughts on Carter's unprecedented quest for a fifth NCAA title, and how you think he looks, what he had to say after he was pushed to overtime against an up and comer at the weight. But I wanted to just get to let's start with the positives here on the PennLive Wrestling Podcast. You can get it anywhere you get your podcast: Google, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify. Thank you for listening and watching all season. But Jimmy, so let's just start with the positives, and the guy that we've written a lot about him just because he's a young wrestler. But Lightning Luke Lodal, just talk about, I don't know if it's peaking at the right time, but it feels like he really wrestled his best when he needed to. And
right. Yeah, and that you have to call it a surprise technically, but it probably surprised Ramos, that's for sure. I don't think it surprised Cael a bit. He's praised Lodal all season and said after the Ramos match that Lodal is getting better every match and that his confidence is flying, right? So he beats Ramos 12-4 in the semis, beats Caleb Smith 4-3 in the finals. He had beaten Smith 4-2 in the dual meet. Lodal's ankle pick against Smith, I mean, it was like a strike from a snake, and there was nothing Smith could do about it. It was so quick, and thus the name Lightning Luke, right?
Right.
And he gave up 2 stalling points, which isn't like him. But a lot of these calls now are subjective, right? The rule states if action doesn't take them out of bounds, it's a warning. If a wrestler pushes another wrestler out of bounds, it's a warning. So that's how Smith got the first warning and the first point. And the Penn State coaches didn't like that call because they thought, there was enough action going on, and plus they were at the edge. But the second stall point was probably legit because Luke was sort of dancing around and holding off possible Smith attempts, takedowns, which a lot of guys do as the clock winds down and they had the lead, and they know where they are. They're in control of the match. But I guess my point in that is in a tournament like that, calls of stalling at the edge or push outs, and some are called, some aren't, they can really change a match. Sometimes deservedly so, and sometimes not. And not all referees call the push-outs and stalling overall all the same way. So it gets pretty dicey at the Nationals. But I think 125 has 10 solid wrestlers. But Lodal has a pretty good chance of winning if he stays as aggressive as he's been, which I'm pretty sure he will. And a couple of times at the Big Tens, he just sort of pushed an opponent out of bounds just to say, hey, I'm in control here. So he's fun to watch for sure. In fact, pretty sure it was that match, he did push a wrestler out pretty hard, and that wrestler ran into a Penn State social media person, and that woman had a big footprint on her thigh, she said. That's the perils of being on the sideline there, Bob.
Don't get too close. Don't get too close. It's the rule of nature. Be careful how close you want to get. Jimmy, so let's just go with, I'm going to throw 3 wrestlers that were champions out to you. And just if anything stood out for any of the 3, have at it. Tyler Kasek, actually, happy for him. He had an incredible season. Really, correct me if I'm wrong, but his only loss was just he was actually winning the match against the Maryland kid, and he had the injury default. Bounced back fairly quickly. I think it was a pancake. Whatever that move was, he hit.
It was.
To open up that match was very impressive to see on the highlights. Mitchell Messenbrink and Levi Haynes, the 3 of them, just off the top of your head, anything, whether it was something they said or maybe something you saw, stand out to you?
Yeah, I think, a fan favorite for sure, I believe, is Kasek, right? Who won at 157 with 3 straight victories. And you mentioned Maryland's Ethan Miller. He, if through that, because of that default, when Kasek lost to him, in the dual meet, he got the top seed there, right? He ends up finishing 6th. And so he didn't live up to the seed. But even though Kasek, he's typically aggressive on his feet, and he said it's all about staying in position and understanding where he is in the match. And when Brandon Cannon from Ohio State shot and Kasek flipped into his back with that pancake, it was quick and dirty. And the big 7-point move was just to open things up right away. Of course, Kasek has had his bout stopped a couple of times for being poked in the eye. So I actually asked him afterward. I said, do you have an NCAA record for eye pokes? He laughed and he said that it comes with the territory and that he would take 1 million eye pokes over not being able to wrestle at all. But he's still ranked number 1. And I expect an interesting match with Cornell's Meyer Shapiro at the NCAAs, but there'll be others as well. We can get into that next week. Messenbrink, interestingly, he was finally challenged from someone who he had already teched out earlier this year and last year, Mikey Caliendo from Iowa.
Yeah.
And he told Caliendo afterward that he appreciated the battle, that not many guys go to battle with him. He was like pulling him up, patting him on the butt and stuff. I'm not sure Caliendo really wanted to hear it, but that's what he was telling him. And it was the first time Messenbrink was held to a single-digit scoring all season in his 4-1 win. Yeah. And, he said he wants to keep dissecting the little positions where he can get more points. But I think Messenbrink will certainly see Caliendo again at the Nationals. It's not a deep field. 165, in my opinion, is probably the weakest weight class in terms of depth. It can be still a little top heavy, but it's not real deep. He might even face former teammate Terrell Barraclough, now at Utah Valley, Utah Valley's only qualifier. And he finished 3rd, I believe, at the Big 12s. But Messenbrink, will be a heavy favorite to win 165 after finishing last year as a runner-up to David Carr. Haynes, he scored 23 points, gave up 5, had a fall in a major in doing so. He was just as steady as always. And what's most impressive to me, Bob, about Haynes is that when he shoots a double leg, even if it's straight on and his opponent extends back and tries to hip out, Haynes is strong enough to suck those legs back in where he can gain control and convert that double leg. And he did it. He did it over the weekend. Sometimes it's just a slow process, but you can see it coming. And his opponent can't do much about it. He's ranked number 2 behind Keegan O'Toole of Missouri. O'Toole scored an overtime takedown against Haynes in Nashville this season, and they didn't wrestle again. Or O'Toole, didn't wrestle again until the Tigers' final dual meet. He did win the Big 12s, and like 165, 74 isn't overly deep. I think it's a little deeper in 65. I think Haynes will have to get past Oklahoma State's Dean Hamady to get to O'Toole in the finals. I think that's how the seeds will roll. And O'Toole and Hamady went to sudden victory in the Big 12s this weekend, and O'Toole got the winning takedown in overtime. So, and speaking of Oklahoma State, David Taylor's team did win the Big 12s, but only heavyweight Wyatt Hendrickson was an individual champ. And they only beat Northern Iowa by 4 points. So it will be fascinating to me to see if Oklahoma State can finish second in the team race at Philly. And pretty sure we know who will be first. But again, stranger things have happened. But that would be major upsets, right, if Penn State doesn't win the tournament.
All right, Bob Flounders here with Jim Carlson on PennLive's Wrestling Podcast, kind of recapping the Big Ten championships where Penn State had 5 champs, won the team title fairly easily like they always do, 181.5 points. It wasn't all great news for Penn State, but that just speaks to the Big Ten tournament is just it is you're going to take your lumps in the Big Ten tournament. You just are. It's too deep. The fields are too deep, and not everything is going to go according to plan. As we look at this, Jimmy, if you just take Josh Barr out of the equation for now, because we don't know if he's going to be able to wrestle. If he was able to wrestle, Penn State would be represented at all 10 weights. If he can't, they're going to have 9 guys, in the tournament. And, we're not going to get to all of them, but I wanted to talk about 3 more kids, the two losers that maybe were a little bit surprising. And also let's get to Carter. And if you guys are listening to this or watching this, please, by all means, check out Jimmy's story that he posted. Headline is Penn State Wrestling Spotlight. For Carter Starocci, the NCAAs are a one-horse race. The quotes from Carter Starocci never really disappoint. What he's trying to do, he has 99 career wins, by the way. What he's trying to do is unprecedented. He has a shot for a 5th NCAA title because he got one, I think, during the COVID year, so he got the extra year. He's going to be the overwhelming favorite. But Jimmy, you talked to him, I guess, after what he went through at Big Tens, and there's so many great quotes in your story just about how he looks at things and kind of like the physical mindset, I'm sorry, the psychological mindset that he has to pair with just his physical tools. It's really a lot to try and overcome if you're going to try and beat this guy. But I just want to focus on one quote that stood out to me, but there was a lot of great quotes in your story. But this to me, really, I think if you followed Carter, or you're a Penn State fan and you've watched him grow as a wrestler and as a champion, this to me, if you could sum up maybe Carter Starocci and how he approaches things, it might be the perfect or close to the perfect quote. Here it is. Some guys look at it as just a sport, that I'm here to go to school, get a degree, and things like that. But for me, it's much more than that. It's soul for soul out there. It's my 24 hours. It's your 24 hours. It's my coaching staff versus yours. It's my training partners versus yours. It's my dad versus your dad. That's kind of how I look at it. Jimmy, he is, I think, outstanding. He has no peers when it comes to making things personal and just getting himself, he's so good, but you always need goals. You always need something to kind of motivate yourself. And I give him a lot of credit because there's a lot of wrestlers out there that would probably I don't want to just assume they're going to win, but I just appreciate how it doesn't seem to me like Carter takes anything for granted, and just how he approaches every match, not just the season in general. I think he's so unique, and it must been very, very. I don't know that you've covered more interesting Penn State wrestlers because of how he approaches things, but just his quotes and his mindset at this point in his life, I think it's incredible.
Well, and he says all that, Bob, with a straight face.
Yeah, I know. He's not. He's not putting on a front. He's not trying for clicks. This is how
exactly. And I'd spoken with him in the last October before the season, and very similar and just goals and all. But yeah, he stands there, and we asked him if he knew much about McAnally, the Minnesota kid.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he'd seen him around, and he said he was big and strong and all. But McAnally probably made a little mistake when he said that Carter had never seen anyone like him. and yes, he did take him to overtime. The kid's a stud. I mean, He's got no neck on him. He's a bruiser. But, he also made a mistake, and look what happened, right? So only two guys have taken Carter to overtime this year, and he beat them both with an overtime takedown, and Kaizen was the other one. So I think they'll be the top three. Dustin Plott will be in there from Oklahoma State. Mm-hmm. But, the 84 became, the 3-horse race, like I just said, with Kaizen and all, and now McAnally. But Carter, of course, says it's a 1-horse race. So what you knew he was going to say that. It's just the way he comes off with it and all. But yeah, it's next week, and you have to think also about last year, where he literally was on one leg, and he takes out 2 former NCAA champs, and I mean, he was in control. It wasn't. And yes, the matches were close, absolutely, mm-hmm. But he knew where he was at all times, and he had talked about it last fall about his mat IQ, and then he says, he doesn't think anyone's mat IQ is like his, and certainly you can't argue with that.
Yeah, really. I mean, you hear the cliche in the world of sports and in other things. He's playing chess out there. And most of those guys are playing checkers, and he's just looking for one mistake, and he's going to beat you if you make any mistakes. It just feels like that. Supremely confident after what he was able to endure last year. The physical skills are off the charts, but I just like the fact that the fire that burns within him, how he takes things so personally, but he uses it in a positive way. It feels like to me. And hey, whatever motivates you, if it's fair game, you should use everything to your advantage. But everything in his toolbox is just elite, and he's going for 5. Hard to count him out. It won't be. I'm sure it won't be easy. I'm sure there's going to be a match, maybe 2 matches, where he's going to have to call on everything that he's learned and all the things he's done and all that training. But it's really hard to pick against him. Jimmy, before we get out of here on the PennLive Wrestling Podcast, I still wanted to get to Bo Bartlett. And I still wanted to get to Shane Van Ness. Bo Bartlett, I think, was unbeaten going into the tournament. He had beaten the returning champion, the Ohio State kid, who we eventually would see in this tournament. And Shane Van Ness, after he had gotten beaten in the Nebraska dual meet, had been on a roll. And like I was saying, things don't always go your way in the Big Ten championships. Ultimately, you get a little bit of a pass because it's not the ultimate tournament. But your thoughts on how they looked and maybe where their mindset is going into nationals after neither one of them made the finals.
Well, clearly a bit of surprise at both ways, with Bartlett losing 5-3 to Vance Vombar of Minnesota in the semis. That kid just did not allow Bartlett to get to his legs. And his first period takedown held up in that 5-3 win. Bartlett's still ranked number 1 by flow, even though Nebraska's Brock Hardy pinned Vombar in the finals. But, everybody's anticipated Big Ten final was the Big Ten third place match with Bartlett and Jesse Mendez. Mm-hmm. And that's what probably maintained his number 1 ranking, because he beat Mendez again. And so he sort of has, I'm not going to say his number this year, but he knows how to wrestle Mendez now. This weight goes 10 deep probably. A lot of All-American candidates. Yeah. But I think Bartlett, if he just has to stay consistently aggressive on his feet early on, and he's done that, and sometimes then he just doesn't shoot after that. But he has as good a shot as anyone if he can just consistently generate offense. And then there's Van Ness. Some guys get hot at the right time of the season. I think Illinois' Cannon Webster did just that, beating Van Ness 4-2 with a late takedown. And he also, a lot of down blocking, a lot of defense. Van Ness couldn't get to his legs. And then that kid only lost to 1-0 to Nebraska's Ridge Lovett in the finals. Van Ness dropped to 3rd in the rankings now, which makes sense. But if Van Ness puts together a consistent 4 bouts, he can get to the finals, I would say, most likely against defending champ Caleb Henson of Virginia Tech, who Van Ness beat 2 years ago to place 3rd. You just don't know on a certain day whether your offense just isn't hot, or like I said, the other guy's defense just won't let him get to his legs. You don't know what's going to happen, and that's what makes this so much fun.
Yeah, the margin of victory is so small when you get to tournaments like this that you almost don't want to be the hunted, because you're the one that everyone's gunning for, and the pressure, I think in a lot of ways, is off the rest of the people. But these guys, you take probably, Jimmy, you tell me if I'm wrong, you take the top 5 or 6 kids at most weights, and they all wrestled each other 10 times. You would get, no one's going 10-0, right? It's going to be, you win 6, you lose 4. And it could come down to an early mistake. It could come down to a referee's decision. It could come down to a late mistake. It could come down to stalling, but that's what makes it such incredible, really theater. And I think it really makes what Carter has done all the more impressive. I know he's been in control, but how he's done it, how he looks at it, and how he wrestles, when it gets tough. He believes he's going to win. He knows you're going to make a mistake. He's going to capitalize. So it just makes him, his quest for 5, one for the thumb. You're a Steelers fan, you get the reference. But I just want to say I'm looking forward to spending some time in Philadelphia at the Wells Fargo Center with you at Nationals. We're going to have a preview podcast before the tournament starts. And there's going to be, we were talking off air, there's going to be a Cael Sanderson availability early next week. I don't know what he's going to say about Josh, but just check PennLive for a bunch of stories in the coming days. We recorded this before all the brackets and the seeds came out, I believe, for NCAAs. But I'll have all that good stuff, Jimmy, on PennLive. Am I correct?
Yes, I will say, Bob, you're talking about wrestlers, going against somebody 10 times and nobody would win 10. I would say that Gable Stevenson would win all 10.
Yeah. I know as good as Greg is, he's up, it's a tough draw, man. He is an outstanding wrestler, a returning NCAA champ, but it's that guy is just, you could wrestle the perfect match against him and probably still lose 4-1.
Yeah. It would have helped if the Buffalo Bills would have kept him during his trial.
That was probably the sign that he was going to not win the title when the Bills cut him. But yeah, what a fantastic athlete. And I'm sure hopefully they'll meet again, and hopefully it can be a little bit tighter. I'd never rule out a Penn State kid in a big match. I think Kassar beat him. Did he not a couple of years ago?
There's only 2 losses. Yeah, Kassar in the Big Ten finals. Big Ten finals and NCAA semifinals, yeah.
Okay. All right, Jimmy, we're going to wrap it up. We've talked for over a half an hour, but great as all. Great recap from you. I'm glad you got to see a little family out there in the Midwest. I hope you're rested and ready, or you're going to get rested and ready. Don't act up on St. Patty's Day weekend. We're going to need you. We're going to need you at full strength in Philadelphia. It should be a lot of fun, but we're going to have a podcast for that. Check out PennLive for all of Jimmy's work, and we'll have some news on the NCAA tournament and the seedings as well.